The conversation, what are we? We're a not-for-profit. We were started 5 years ago in Australia. We now have a team of 120 people, and we've got what we call a virtual newsroom of 38,000 contributors from 1,600 universities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is us. As I said, 5 years ago, we started out, the notion being that journalism is fundamentally, the model of journalism is fundamentally broken, and Aaron sort of talked a little bit to some of the problems that are happening in the media business. So we came at it from a completely different point of view, and that is from a marketplace point of view and from a point of view of a world of open platforms. And so today I'm going to largely talk about that. I'll touch a little bit on the conversation, but I wanted to more broadly talk about the model itself and how it's working. So many of you hopefully have seen Kevin Kelly's great book, which was from 2008, and I think it's still as valid today as it was in 2008, and that is essentially the main message being there that the internet's a copy machine, and a lot of the reason for disruption in media is because of this very phenomenon. So increasingly people can get things for free if they can on the internet, that they won't pay for them, and that's still a challenge today in media and many other businesses. And at the same time, it doesn't matter if you own the distribution. So if you're a newspaper and you've got a print product and you're printing it out and you've got, delivery trucks delivering it and, you own that channel, in the online world, that no longer matters. And I think we all know that now. So we've seen what this means for journalism. It means the value of news has been bid to zero. So you can come up with the most fantastic news story, you can break the best story, you can spend 6 months working on it, and within about 5 minutes, it's on every other syndicated news site in your region, and all your hard work is duplicated somewhere else. Print's yesterday's news. No one wants to read yesterday's news in a newspaper today. Investigative journalism, as we know, it's supremely challenged. Clickbait is winning. I'd like to say that, despite the push effect of clickbait, that there isn't a pull effect, but people are reading clickbait, and that continues to win the war for eyeballs. Another phenomenon I think is interesting right now is autoplay video is taking off. So we're being forced this autoplay video because of the nature of the advertising industry, even though research shows people actually don't like autoplay video, they don't want it in their feeds, they don't necessarily want to see it on their Facebook feed, but we're being fed it because it works with the advertising model right now. It's an environment where the audience isn't first. And so how is the mainstream media responding to this environment? So we're seeing paywalls, obviously, and they are consistently challenging for media organisations, but ultimately producers of quality media have to find some way to get people to pay for their content, and they're having some success with that, but as I said, it's only some success. And if you don't have a paywall, then you're doing this. So you're doing this cross-promotion, fake news, and signing up for these services where you can get revenue in to pay for journalists. So this conference being about hackers, or largely being hacker-driven, I think we don't need to just talk about hacking the tools that we use and hacking journalism and the technology. I think we need to talk about how we hack the business model. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that. So that ultimately, as journalists, we don't end up having to do this for a living, because no one wants to do this. No journalist wants to do this, but every journalist has bills to pay, and if you want to be a journalist, increasingly, you're asked to do this. Same with this. At the same time, this is the other phenomenon that's happening. So when I talked about media business models in a world of platforms, the platforms are essentially driving the production of our news product now. And so this is a research project from the Tao Centre at Columbia University, and they do fantastic work. I'd urge you to have a look at this. This is completely available online. And it shows you how the mainstream media in the US in particular, and they're expanding it into other countries over time, is feeding content into all of the platforms and how that's evolving over time. And so, you're seeing that some of these players are really pushing heavily into Facebook, they're pushing heavily into the other platforms because they have to. They really don't have a choice at the moment. So this is an interesting one to watch, and it's kind of a tide, I think, that we can't rail against. So there are some publishers, and you can see who they are in there, who are saying, well, I just don't think that we want to play in that space. I don't think we want to have the platforms control our product. I don't think we want to strip our advertising out. Ultimately, they can say that, but they're fighting a losing battle. And at the same time, my talk was entitled Platforms and Marketplaces. So marketplaces is the other big phenomenon that's happening. So marketplaces, businesses where you have usually a two-sided marketplace. You know, a classic example is Uber or Airbnb, but there are plenty of other examples. Marketplace businesses are where the money is going. So this is where VC money is going. And you can see in the left corner there that essentially the money is being directed into those platforms quite heavily, and a lot of the other more traditional ones, even digital media there, e-commerce, not as popular right now. And that's a phenomenon we in the media need to be really aware of. So there's some example of marketplaces as they evolve. So you've got industries changing over time, you've got marketplaces popping up around them, and there's a great example that I've got here from Paul McCarthy, who's one of the authors who writes for us, and essentially he's talking about the third generation marketplace, which is where, you know, things are fairly fluid, it works quite independently without any kind of real control, and there's some examples up there which you can have a look at. So the question then is, as media companies or entrepreneurs or people who want to play in the media space today, if you were to start a media company up today, and God help you if you do, I used to run a media company, so I know how difficult it is, but I'd encourage you all to think about, you know, how we can hack the business model of journalism and media. If you were, I would say, go back to Kevin Kelly's generatives. So, and even inside your organisation today, your traditional media organisation, I think these things are still as relevant, and that is, if the internet's the world's biggest copy machine, what are the things that can't be copied? What are the things that people are going to value? What are the things people are going to pay for? Because I just don't think traditionally that media companies think in this way always. They think, we built this great product, why doesn't everybody want to pay for it? Well, unfortunately, news is now a commodity, and even though it's great, people just aren't willing to pay for it. So some of the things Kevin Kelly talks about are things like immediacy. So, you know, obviously news in that sense is able to give immediacy. The problem with that is that Twitter gives you immediacy as well. So Twitter may not be the best place for you to go and get your news from, but it kind of serves a utility. So it's where people go when news is breaking, and they get that access to that news for free, and it's user generated, and we all know how that works. But what are some of the other things that are kind of not able to be easily copied? So personalisation. So that's things like curation, personalising newsletters. We're seeing a massive take up now increasingly of tailored, curated newsletters that, you know, people probably never thought, you know, email would be kind of the new hot thing. But email now, because it's personalised and because people are curating great content for people, it's gaining traction again. And interpretation, that's kind of the same thing. You know, again, when I talk about curation, that's okay. Well, and when we look at what Vox does, they do this really well. They deliver context around the news, and so people are struggling with the noise. If you can come in and help cut back the noise and kind of contextualise it for them, then that's a winning product. Authenticity. So, you know, I think the media's done a really poor job at being authentic or being seen as authentic. So, and this is in the rise, you know, in the drive for clicks essentially. So once you've lost the trust of your audience because you're going down that path of clickbait, you don't really ever get it back. Embodiment. So this is what the music industry essentially has found a way to survive around. So the music industry said, well, you know, we can't sell records. What are we going to sell? We're going to sell T-shirts. We're going to sell concert tickets. We're going to get on the road. We're going to have events. And it's the same thing for media companies. Media companies are now doing this as well. It's about branding. It's a good example is Recode, from which, you know, now owned by Vox. They own that event space really well, and people are proud to be associated with that sort of event. Patronage. So patronage is the fact that people actually want to support quality media. So at the conversation every year, we ask people to give us money. So we go out in an annual drive and we say, hey, if you like what we do, give us some money. And every year we get more. I think the first year we did it, we got 100,000. The second year we got 300,000. And every year we do it, we get more money. So people actually want to support quality journalism. You just need to find a way to build a brand that they feel an affinity with to the point where they're willing to give you money. Discoverability, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So helping people find things that they like. So again, that's part of your brand identity really, is saying, hey, we're like you, we kind of think we're all in the same group, and here's some things that we like that we think that you will also like. And I think that Vox does that really well as well, and particularly Quartz Media does it well as well. So, ooh, the map's missing. There is normally a map on that. But anyway, that sort of shows the growth of the conversation over time. We are essentially a not-for-profit. Each independent conversation is set up as an independent entity. So what usually happens is people come to us and say, hey, we'd like to do the conversation in our country. And we say, sure, go and raise the money and we'll help you. And, and from there it goes. So that raising of money, that money comes from either foundations usually to begin with, some, not always. In Australia, we largely started with universities straight away, and universities who pay a membership fee to be part of the conversation. We are talking to people in Spain and in Chile, and we're hoping to get it into Spanish soon. We have it in French already. The development team builds and supports a platform from Melbourne, Australia. It's a Ruby on Rails platform. And we build it up for every individual conversation, but usually it's all based on the same back end. It's a kind of world-class CMS. I'm one of the few journalists that's proud to say, hey, I like our CMS, it's good, it's easy to use. I never have to explain to our contributors, who are academics, how to use it, because it's so intuitive. So the way that we work, we're Creative Commons, so we let anyone republish our content for free. We encourage it. We actively push our content into other media organisations, and there's a list of some of them from around the world. And since these numbers were put on this slide, it's actually grown, so we're 3.3 million on site now, and with republication it's 35 million, and it's growing all the time around the world. So we're building our network, essentially, and we're an open platform, so we're not kind of trying to fight against the trends that are sort of taking over the internet in terms of platforms. We're trying to be part of that ecosystem and contribute towards it. And it's 22,000. I think now it's sort of 25,000 republishers around the world. So why do people choose to republish our content? One of the reasons we think is because we're independent, B, we're very careful about not letting people push their barrow or their bias or their agenda on our site. So most of the content on the conversation is editor driven, so we have a team of editors in each office who follows the daily news and says, okay, well, what's happening in the daily news? I'm going to go to an academic and find the best expert on this particular piece of news. So, the earthquake in Italy is the current example. Let's go to someone who is an expert on earthquakes and sort of talk about, is there increased earthquake activity at the moment? What's happening? Or let's talk about the humanitarian response, or let's talk about areas, things where they're an expert on. And so with the decline in media, as everybody would know, beat journalists are kind of rapidly disappearing. So we're getting these all-rounded journalists who are expected to cover multiple areas who really don't have any specialist expertise in one area anymore. And that's a great loss to journalism, but we think we can counter that by bringing experts from academia and kind of combining their expertise with our sort of journalistic flair and ability to edit and make them sound, understandable and easy to read. We also ask all of the contributors to fill out this disclosure statement. So it's very clear if they have any agenda, and if they do have any major conflicts, then we would stop them from writing for us. But this gives you an idea of where they're getting their grant money from, if they have any political affiliations and what their kind of worldview is going to be. So the other reason that universities work with us and pay us to be part of this platform is because of the flow through. So what happens when people write for us? And because we have a general audience and we have great relationships with republishers, a lot of these academics are having really great cut through. So they're getting radio interviews afterwards, they're being able to talk to other people from other media organisations, they're getting research commissions, they're collaborating. It's kind of magnified in terms of what they do. And that's just some case studies. You can look at the slides later for those. And then the universities, we don't restrict anyone from writing for us as long as they have an academic affiliation. So they have to have a current position, whether it's a lectureship or an adjunct or a professorship or a fellow, whatever. But the universities that pay us money, they get access to this dashboard, so they can see who's getting traction, who's doing the best, who's kind of the most popular in terms of audience cut through and social sharing as well. And that's the rest of the dashboard. So increasingly we're adding metrics into this all the time, so we're giving the universities more and more value over time. So in terms of bringing it back to the journalism business model and hopefully inspiring some of you to think about, well, what is a model that might work? How do we hack the media business? Again, another great book, Jeff Jarvis this time, talked about really what we need to do to kind of be the next media organisation. And he says basically we need to distribute as widely as we can. So this goes back to this discussion I was having before about Facebook Instant. We can't afford to ignore the platforms because ultimately we have to distribute as widely as possible. We're in a network economy, so basically we have to collaborate. Again, you know, the Tao Centre at Columbia did some really interesting research that I showed you before, but part of that involved talking to the platform providers and talking to the media. And already there's this massive divergence between the media saying, well, we don't like the platforms, they think they own everything, it's not fair, they're sucking our content. You know, and this is why, for example, Google is being forced to pay money in Europe essentially because ultimately they are thriving on the back of the production of media companies around the world. So that's one view, and of course, you know, that's a fair view to have, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a phenomenon that's not going to go away, and we need to be aware that we're in an ecosystem now, and we can either try and fight against the ecosystem or we can work with it. So that's something that the conversation has tried to do. As I said, we're hoping to expand over time. We're already working in 5 countries. We're supporting a team of 120 journalists, and largely through funding from universities. We think we've found a new model, and I'd encourage you to think about what could be another model similar to this that could work, where you're bringing, you know, 2 sides of a marketplace together to help achieve success and to ultimately support journalist jobs and the kind of jobs that journalists with a lot of experience and kind of a real ability to want to be proud of the work they do want to be part of. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks for the invitation to be here.